My name's Jerry McClanahan, and I guess you could call me a Route 66 author, artist, historian, just whatever. If it's Route 66, I'm in for it. Okay, I'm best known for the Easy 66 Guide for Travelers, a little spiral-bound book with over 200 maps and directions on how to drive Route 66, east and westbound, and then attractions, motels, gas stations, museums, optional trips. There's dirt road sections, there's dead ends, there's side trips. It's just basically a book on how to enjoy and discover Route 66 for yourself. My Route 66 passion started actually back in '59, our first Route 66 trip from California back through Oklahoma City when I was just a kid. Then almost every year in the '60s we'd hit it during summer vacation. And Dad was the type to drive straight through without stopping, and I saw all this wonderful stuff. The billboards, the neon signs, the cowboys and the Indians, the giant rattlesnakes, the see the live buffalo, and Dad just wouldn't stop. So that stuck in my head. 1981, I had my dad and we drove out to California from Texas. And I made him stop at everything this time. We stopped at Klein's Corners, we stopped at Meteor Crater, we stopped at Grand Canyon Caverns. And back in '69, we were going to stop there on our last Route 66 trip while we lived in California. We pulled into the restaurant and found out the cavern was 1 mile off of 66. So he would not drive that 1 mile off the road to go see that cavern. We would have spent an hour or two down in there if it had been right on 66. But it was pulling teeth to get him to go 1 mile off. So that's where I became interested in 66. But on that trip with Dad, there was frustration. We kept hitting dead ends, and he didn't like that. And I'd ask him, well, was this road 66? You could see the power lines running along the telephone poles. And he didn't know. I didn't know. So we got back, I started looking at old gas station maps and county maps and trying to find all these. And the more I dug, the more I found. I did trips in '83 and '86 and '88, trying to find as much of it as I could. I started out just wanting to photograph it, but then I started doing artwork based on it. And I had all this material where I mapped it, and I started writing articles about the old alignments. I rediscovered the Jericho Gap in Texas that people had claimed had been abandoned and paved over and was no longer there, and I found many, many miles of it you could still drive today. In fact, the little town of Jericho, some people recently bought it and are cleaning it up and kind of renovating it. So all of this, the photography, the mapping, the artwork, just kind of all comes together. And I wrote dozens of articles on abandoned sections of Route 66 in the '90s for a couple of different magazines. And I did a set of maps with my friend Jim Ross from Arcadia, Oklahoma. We started out those in '94, one map for each state, even Kansas, which only has 13 miles. We gave it its own map. And Chandler is pretty amazing. It's bypassed by the interstate in 52, but during the week, we still have a tremendous amount of traffic on Route 66 through downtown, and it's hard to even find a parking place across the street. So it's a little time capsule of how 66 used to be in town. But getting back to the books, so I had the map set successfully sold since 1994. In 2003, my friend David Knudsen, who heads the National Historic Route 66 Federation, called me up and said, Jerry, the route needs a good guidebook. And I said, okay. Took me 2 years of solid work to develop it, and that's all I did, nothing else. I took one last trip on 66, both directions, before I sat down. I took 3 weeks to do everything, driving all hours of the day, I tape recorded my notes. I had over 30 90-minute cassette tapes, and it took me a month to sit down and transcribe them, and I got so tired of my voice after that. But I put the book together, and I'm happy that it's been a success. People call it the Bible of Route 66, which is kind of blasphemous and embarrassing, but that's okay. It's let me meet people from all around the world. Jim Ross and his wife Shelley and I also did a book, Route 66 Sightings. We self-published it, sold the first run, did another print run, and we're almost out of that. And I'm thinking that's where we'll leave it, because it's been a very successful book. Of our photos and writing about our favorite Route 66 pictures, mine go back to 1981. And it's just amazing the amount of creative, enthusiastic, amazing people I've met on Route 66. I started out doing it by myself with no connections to others, just driving it for myself and taking my photos. And then in the 90s, I started meeting other people, joining associations. I am a board member of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association. I'm the Lincoln County representative. And we do things, we go to events and publicize Route 66. We have cleanup days. We're working on many different projects. We publish every year a trip guide to Oklahoma Route 66. Every state has an association that's working to promote it and publicize it. And as an example of the importance of the international traveler is to Route 66. In 2020, with the COVID pandemic, which hit right at the start of tourist season, all of a sudden, we had no international travel at all on Route 66 that year. Normally, I would have had like one Australian tour guide bring 3 or 4 groups that year. Plus, I would have people from New Zealand and from all over Europe and from Asia, people in tours or people individually. None of them. It cut Route 66 tourism by more than half, because we lost a lot of American tourists too. Everybody along Route 66 suffered because of that. And we're hoping that this year, in the summer of 2021, that they'll be able to start returning. But it's a huge influence on Route 66. Towns like Seligman, they live basically on the international tourists. You can go to Seligman, like if you stay overnight, and early in the morning, it's calm and peaceful. The streets are empty. The store owners are out washing their driveways down, and you can take photos of all the buildings and maybe talk to angels sitting out there quietly. And then it's like a switch is turned. All these tour buses from like Las Vegas and stuff just pile in there and double park, and you're trying to take a picture of the snow cap, and all of a sudden here's a bus in front of it. And the town is instantly tripled in population or more, because here's all these Japanese tourists and Chinese tourists and European tourists, and they just swarm in the town. Oatman is much the same way. But we love meeting people from all over the world. I've got in my next room a wall with money from other countries. And it's just amazing. They're super excited to be in the United States. They're excited to be on Route 66. Some of them come because they like our music, like the old rockabilly music and rock and roll. Some of them like the Old West. Some of them just wanted to drive in America, and then they found Route 66 and doing Google searches, and they realized, oh, well, here's a road that has convenient maps and guidebooks, and we can follow that. And we can go to Grand Canyon. We can take a side trip to Monument Valley. They can go a side trip to Las Vegas. They can end up in Hollywood. So it connects all the cool stuff they want to see. They just, some days on 66, most of the people you see will be from another country. Bikers from Northern Europe coming through in just huge swarms of bikes. They often rent bikes. Sometimes people will ship their own bikes or their own cars. We've had people in, what is that? Fiat Panda, I think. We've had people in Morgans. We've had people it's like a car show. You have the American classics coming through all the time. And I'm always excited when somebody comes up and they're in like a 52 DeSoto or some type of other cool car, it's a kick. I've often hear somebody from like Europe will tell me they came to America with a little kind of a trepidation, a little expectations. Maybe they think we're going to be rude. Maybe they're afraid of gun violence. Maybe they're afraid of this and that. But once they get here, they say, it's just knocked our preconceptions out the window. They can't believe how friendly the people they meet on Route 66 are. I hear this thousands of times. They can't believe how friendly the people are. They're starting out in Chicago in the Midwest. They're going through Oklahoma and on into the western states. They are meeting volunteers at the museums and attractions, and these are people who are retired and have nothing better to do than to tell you every detail about the history of their town, and they love that. Everybody along 66 loves to hear, you know, their accents. You know, well, them people talk funny. They think we talk funny, so. All the Australians, mate. You have to really listen and start parsing their lingo, mate. You know, it's great. It's great. It's an international exchange. We learn about them, they learn about us. I think it's like a charm bracelet, and you've got different charms along here, and some of them are like Western charms, country charms, city charms. You got the blues, you got the Blues Brothers, you've got red dirt music here, you've got the Indians out west. You got Native Americans. It's a long village with a lot of interesting people living in it. Yeah. This is my favorite. This is the Jackrabbit Trading Post in Joseph City, Arizona. It's been there since 1949. I've got an original sign that says 381 miles. My brother and I would be in the car trying to spot those signs first. You know, that was our little car game, you know, to see the rabbits. My dad never stopped there. But now I stop there every time I go by because the people are really great. It's one of the treasures of Route 66. Then I have on this wall here the Munger Boss Motel with a big Lincoln out in front. I went to the trouble to calculate how the reflections of the bowling alley and the motel across the street would look. And I painted that in honor of Bob and Ramona, and they're buying that motel in 1971. Everything else is just different scenes, gas pumps, neon signs, the Rock Cafe in Stroud with the owners as they looked in 1952. Sometimes I will restore something, like I restored how the Castaneda Hotel in Las Vegas, New Mexico, 6 miles off the route, looked. I restored how the Painted Desert Trading Post near Holbrook looked. But friends of mine have bought that and spent many work sessions rebuilding it, restoring the foundation, leveling it out, putting a new roof on it. And hopefully in the fall, I'll be able to go up and paint the letters back in again. Last fall, I traced them and kind of plotted them so I could photograph it and have a record of them. Sometimes, like I say, I restore something. Sometimes I just paint it like it looks now, the rusty old gas pump or a building. I love the subject matter. I love old cars, any old cars. I have a 57 Chevy 4-door station wagon, and before anybody asks, no, it's not a Nomad, because that's the only station wagon a non-car guy knows about a Chevy. It's a 4-door 210 Townsman. It's got patina, and it'll probably always have patina because it's super expensive to get cars painted. But it runs and drives, and I actually drove it 25 miles last week, you know. For the Centennial, I'd like to see all the Route 66 associations come together and kind of plan their events to kind of dovetail together, to kind of work on each other, to promote the whole road. And maybe you could have simultaneous events at either end and then have some in the middle, have it timed where people could drive it and see all these things. I would like to see, well, like in the Oklahoma Association, our president recently asked our board member to give them ideas of things that we could do for the Centennial. And a lot of my ideas were help this person downtown restore the Phillips 66 station. Help restore this old alignment or this bridge. Use the Centennial to help restore and reinterpret a lot of its old sites and save them. That would be an important thing to do. Also document. We continue to document things. The association has all of the material from the late Marianne Clark, who is a Tulsa resident who did the Route 66 cookbook and others. And we're putting them on the website, you know, a lot of her memorabilia, you know, so people can see those. Preservation and promotion is what I hope for the Centennial. Of course, Route 66 went across country, and it had to cross a lot of bodies of water. And in the early days, maybe a person would have to ford a creek or something. But fortunately, in the 20s and 30s and on, many excellent bridges were built for Route 66. Possibly one of the most famous would be the Chain of Rocks Bridge that crosses the Mississippi River from Illinois into St. Louis. It is an unusual bridge in the fact that it is bent. Now, the reason it's bent is because there was a crease in the blueprints when they built it. No, I'm just lying to you. It was done to avoid interfering with some city water pickups that were, downstream of it. So they had to kind of change the routing. It was a toll bridge. It was the first Route 66 crossing in 1926. And then later, the official route was moved further south, but it was a city route. And then it was bypassed and was going to be torn down. And now it's owned by a trails organization. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, you can be able to drive across it in your vehicle at special occasions. Back sometime many, many, many years ago, I was able to go out and attend a wedding that was held in the middle of the Chain of Rocks Bridge. The couple had won a contest. And so we're out there with the chair sitting in the middle of the bridge, and here they come in a stretched 57 Chevy limo. And there's some safety boats holding station right below the bridge in case one of us wedding guests happens to fall over. And, that was exciting. That was different. Then continuing on west from there, another important bridge was at Times Beach, where there's Route 66 State Park. On the east shore is a really cool museum. The west shore was the town of Times Beach, which was contaminated by dioxin that was in oil that was spread on the streets to control dust. The town's gone. It's just now it's a state park. It's empty land. The original bridge, the decking has been removed because it was crumbling. And there are efforts to try to preserve that and at least preserve the remaining bridge structure. There's another endangered bridge further on in Missouri, Gasconade River Bridge, which is east of Lebanon. Boy, the Missouri Association and other groups have really fought hard trying to save that, tried to get Missouri Department of Transportation to transfer ownership to the association. And there is issues about insurance and other things. And really, it's just it's up in the air now whether it will be saved or not. I think it would be a huge sin for that 1923 bridge to disappear, considering there's other places where similar bridges have been left alongside the road. Here in Oklahoma, we have the Pony Bridge. The Pony Bridge is because it's got 38 little trusses, and they're small, so they're pony trusses. And it runs for about 3/4 of a mile. It was built in the early 30s. It's a great, fantastic bridge. It's very narrow and scary, but underneath it, it's in poor condition. And ODOT is planning from probably spring of 22 to completely dismantle the bridge, rebuild the deck to where the deck will support the bridge on the original piers, and reinstall the arches, the 38 arches, as guardrails. They will still be there, but they won't actually be holding it up. And they're going to widen it by about 2 foot on each side, which, it's still going to be cool. But there'll be a couple of years where you won't be able to drive on it. But they're also planning to have turnouts on either side where actually you will be able to park and see it better. Because right now, there's really no safe place to park. And, you get out into Albuquerque, west of Albuquerque, the Rio Puerco Bridge. Here is a really cool through truss girder bridge that was left right beside the interstate, no problem. There is the abandoned Walnut Creek Bridge near Flagstaff. Backtrack a bit. Catoosa, Oklahoma. We had the twin bridges there. One of them was removed. One of the spans is on the northwest side of the river as a approach to a restaurant. The other 2 spans are on the southeast side in a park. So you can still see the original bridge right practically in the same location. So there's other things you can do besides just scrapping it and hauling it off. Devil's Elbow Bridge, it was rehabilitated and restored. It was rescued. It's a beautiful setting. You're on a section of Route 66 that winds down through a valley up against a steep cliff. The Devil's Elbow was referring to when they would run logs down that river, and that bend would trap all the logs, and they'd have a huge log jam. So that was the Devil's Elbow, And it survived a flood the last few years that nearly swamped the town out. It's one of my favorite little drives on 66, very historic. The road leading up to either side of town is concrete, but starting downhill into the town and then uphill on the other side, a few miles away, is asphalt, because they originally intended to build a dam that would have flooded that whole area, and they didn't want to go to the expense of concrete pavement. Then they built later the Hooker Cut on the bypass around town. That cut, it was one of the deepest rock cuts in the U.S. And that was an early 4-lane section of Route 66. You got a couple of really interesting ancient bridges in central Arizona, north central Arizona, between Winslow and Flagstaff. At Two Guns. Two Guns is kind of an old western town that's set on the banks of Canyon Diablo. And there is a bridge built about 1914, a concrete arch bridge that leads to the older part of that town. It looks like something from Arches National Park. The whole town is a relic. There's also a very similar bridge a little further down at Padre Canyon near Twin Arrows. That bridge is harder to get to. You have to kind of come in on a backcountry section of 66, about 7 miles, and then hike the last few parts. Those are magnificent remnants of pre-Route 66 travel. That was National Old Trails Highway. First off, when you get to California, there were several ends. The first end was downtown at 7th and Broadway. Although there's some recent controversy we won't go into now, but the original end was downtown LA at 7th and Broadway. Then in the 30s, that was moved out to Santa Monica at the corner of Lincoln and Olympic, because one highway had to end at another highway. So it didn't actually go down to Ocean Boulevard or the pier. But it was tradition for people, once they went that far, to go out and see the Pacific Ocean and go out to the pier. So we call that the traditional or spiritual end of Route 66 out at the Santa Monica Pier. And a gentleman named Dan Rice started his little t-shirt kiosk out there on the pier. And he had rebuilt and added to the pier a sign that had appeared in a movie that said the end of the trail. Your Route 66, the end of the trail. So it's not an official end, it's not an official sign, but it's a postscript to your whole trip right there. You're right there at the Pacific. You start out at Chicago and you can see, Lake Michigan. Then you end at the Pacific. And for a longest while, there was really nothing special at the official end. Then they put up a historic 66 sign. And now the people that own Mel's Diner have reopened this old diner that's set at that corner and had been a dental office for many years. So now you actually have Mel's Diner with neon at that corner. So there's more interest there now.
I did try to go to Mel's. It's still closed.
Yes.
It's out there.
Yeah.
But on the pier, the amusement rides, a lot of them have stuff that says 66.
Yeah. Dan was the first to promote 66 on there. Now it's like everybody's saying that, hey, this is something, we need to attract people to the pier. Okay, Bob Waldmeyer was the Route 66 itinerant hippie migrating artist. He was really a character. I'd be going down Route 66, at any time, and I'd look over here, and there would be his little Volkswagen camper van that he tricked out with all his displays and signs and environmental messages. And so I'd stop and visit with him. Or sometimes he'd be in his school bus, which he built basically a wooden prairie schooner structure on the back of it, He had his own wooden antique RV. Bob was an early promoter and mapper of Route 66. He had a huge number of postcards and pen and ink illustrations. He would constantly travel between his home in Illinois and out west. He bought the old Hackberry station and turned it into his visitor center for quite a few years. We miss Bob. His family runs the Cozy Dog in Springfield. I was able to go to his last art show there before he passed away. And people just there to show love and support for him. Of course, we're both artists, so we were friends, and we'd compare notes about, he'd ask me about watercolor techniques, and I'd ask him about other things, you know. And he would introduce me to his friends. He said, "This is the other great Route 66 artist," you know. But yeah, Bob was a one of a kind. There'll never be another Bob Waldmeyer who travels the route in a strange, funky vehicle and does artwork on site in his unique cartoon style. Okay, I have an original Bob Waldmeyer. He did a set of postcards of Route 66, all 8 states. So at his last art show, I was lucky to be able to buy his Oklahoma, the original. Now, I would have done it this big and then had it shrunk. He did it the final size. And it is packed with lettering, and sometimes there's whiteout and lettering on top of that. And I'm thinking, okay, my goodness, how did this man do this extremely intricate art and lettering at that size? He was a genius at that.
Tell me about Bob's vehicles.
Okay. Bob Waldmeyer was a unique Route 66 character. He was this itinerant, hippie, migratory roadside artist on Route 66. And he traveled it in a succession of really interesting vehicles. The one he's most well known for is his Volkswagen camper van, which he festooned with all his signs and collection and trinkets, environmental statements, and he would drive that down Route 66 and just camp out along the way and do his artwork on site. I would drive down Route 66 myself and either see him in his van. Sometimes I would see him in his converted school bus, which he added this whole wooden superstructure to and built him this amazing, kind of like a land yacht, kind of like a prairie schooner. And it was psychedelic inside and rustic outside. And you just stop in and chew the fat with Bob. He would go back and forth on 66 between his home in Illinois and, you know, the West Coast. And many businesses would hire him to do a picture or a postcard of their establishment. And other times he'd do ones, you know, for himself. His little pen and ink sketches, which he had produced dozens of postcards, maps, and he loved nature. So he has lots of artwork about birds and bioregional issues. He started his bioregional visitor center in Hackberry, Arizona, back when he owned it. And he was there for many years until I think there was too many people stopping by and there was too many strip mining started in nearby, you know, mountain areas, and he moved to a quieter corner of southeastern Arizona. But yeah, it was always a treat to see Bob along the way, always a treat to talk to him. He was a unique character. There'll never be another Bob Waldmeyer who sat alongside 66 doing his artwork in his strange vehicles and just living this carefree bohemian life, you know. He was the spirit of the road. So the animators, the producers of Cars for Pixar, they did a trip with Michael Wallace, the famous Route 66 author and spokesperson. And they were in Galena, Kansas, and that's where they got the inspiration for Tow Mater. And as they traveled west, you know, they became acquainted with Bob Waldmeyer's works. So they had this hippie van character that they wanted to name Waldmeyer in his honor. And Bob asked me what I thought, you know, and I'm thinking, well, that's kind of cool, but they're going to make Happy Meals out of these things, Bob. Okay, Bob Waldmeyer was a staunch vegetarian, even though his family runs the Cozy Dog in Springfield. And he kind of, I think that's one thing that influenced him to politely decline the honor. So they named him Fillmore. So later Bob adopted that. He did a really neat illustration of where here is Bob's van and Fillmore meeting, and Bob's van says, "What the F, it's Fillmore." We decided to put out a Route 66 coloring book for adults. The first version starts at the gallery and goes west to Santa Monica. There will be another version eventually that will start here and go to Chicago. And it was a hoot to do. I just did some of the more interesting things. Some are famous and some are not. When I do a project, there are things you have to include that people expect, and you have to have a few famous things. But then I like to sneak something in there that's more obscure. And it's just another way of getting Route 66 out there to people.
I'm looking here at the Bel Air. Do you had any favorite cars of that era?
Well,
Or the Finns? Did you like the Finns a lot?
I like Finns. When I was a kid, my dad was a Ford man, so that Chevy I have is the only one I've ever owned. But I used to have Studebakers, and there is the grill of my 58 Silver Hawk over here. It was such a rusty car, I ended up parting it out.
Wow.
I want my ashes mixed with tar and spread on some cracks on Route 66 or something.